My name is Amina Inloes. I am a lecturer in Islamic Studies of many varieties at the Islamic College in London in the United Kingdom. Yes, we have an Islamic college in the United Kingdom, and I am the author of Women in Shi'ism, Ancient Stories, Modern Ideologies. I think everyone is running away now. As for the inspiration behind the book, I think that probably needs little explanation. Discussions about women in Islam, really dominated the 20th century and nowadays have seeded to other discussions about gender and Islam. That said, there's still a lot of ideological mudslinging in general in America, for example, right now about men and women and traditional roles and so forth. So it is a live topic that affects a lot of people, including myself, being Muslim and female. Beyond that, I would say to some degree, the product was organic. I didn't go into it necessarily expecting to come up with a certain conclusion. In fact, some of the things you find tucked away in the conclusion section really only emerged maybe in the last month or even the last couple of weeks, which I was also surprised by. That's, of course, one of the good things that happens if you come up with surprising things. That said, I would say one of the topics I discuss under the rubric of modern ideologies, the quote-unquote separate but equal theory of men and women, which says men and women are created equal in spiritual worth, but separate in constitution, in nature, however one perceives that, and have different social roles, but are somehow equal. I should say I have personally had some viewpoints about that idea, despite its adoption by orthodoxy, much of orthodoxy in the 20th century, for at least a couple decades. So it was an opportunity to address it directly, both in explaining it and bringing up some challenging aspects of it, and also looking at it in a way that I consider to be authentic to the Shi'i tradition. That is to say, narrations which contain a lot of content and ideas which is either unique to the Shi'i tradition or unique in the sense of being strongly codified among Shia, even if some other Muslims like Sufis might share certain ideas. I discussed the past, the present, and the future. Someone told me this is arrogant, but I thought it was quite clever. I begin with the present, and I do explore 20th century thought about women and Islam and women in Shi'ism, but the discussions are not necessarily similar in most cases. So I'm looking at what's going on or what went on the ground, and in particular focusing on the separate but equal ideology, which has been promoted and celebrated as, one can say, the Islamic viewpoint by a number of people in the past century. I also make a number of observations about the ideologization of religion and the difference between faith and ideology and the way these things tend to be conflated in modernity. All that in war, in the present. Then I get away from that sort of contemporary discussion and I delve into the past. Not only the classical past in terms of hadith and manuscripts, but the ancient past. Yes, this is not a book about Hazrat Fatima, peace be upon her. It's not a book about Bibi Zainab, peace be upon her. In part because those are very commonly discussed figures. No, I'm reaching way back into the past, to the ancient women who are mentioned in our narrative. So Eve, peace be upon her, and the Queen of Sheba. Basically, the women in the narratives who you can say is either shared with the Hebrew Bible and the biblical tradition, to include the Virgin Mary. I would say women before Islam, but some people might mistake that as being women during the time of Jahiliyyah, which is not the primary focus, but it is the narratives of ancient women. Now, why? Why is it that we would talk about that? Well, first of all, it's not something we get a lot of discussion on with respect to Shi'ism. There tends to be a bit more of a forward-looking look in Shi'ism, if you will, looking at people lived during the lifetime of the Prophet, sallallahu alaihi wa alihi, and the generation of the Sahaba, the generations of the Imams, in our discourse. Not 100%. Obviously, we have books dealing with the ancient narratives, but I think there is a certain slant towards the later history compared to maybe with what gets discussed more frequently in the Sunni context, but there is interest in it. So that's one reason we're looking at the ancient past, because if we don't look at the ancient past a lot, we certainly do not look at the females in the ancient past a lot, because they're females and history is his story. Secondarily, I have a theory. My theory is explained in here. And that is, we have a number of texts about women that are prescriptive, which have found their way into the hadith collections, such as women are this, women are that, women are deficient in this or that. The point is there are generalizations about women. I would proffer that those texts may or may not be authentic. I will not pass judgment right now, but one can perhaps glean a more accurate and complex and nuanced view about someone's perceptions of women or any other topic by simply analyzing how they discuss the subject when it is not the main subject. So for example, let's say we're talking about Adam and Eve, which is actually the longest chapter in the book because it's very important to all of us ancestors. The way I talk about Eve will tacitly reflect my assumptions about the nature of women, or do I think women have a fixed social role? Do I think there's a gender hierarchy? Are women included as part of the broader religious tradition? Is there a sense of exclusion? So that's what I do. I engage in a lot of narrative analysis about hadith in order to deduce the underlying messages, subtexts, also what is not mentioned about these women in ancient history.